Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for December 3rd, 2018. The winter meetings are coming up in a week. I'm finally in a position to do the retrospective of the Cubs 2018 series. And I want to talk about the difference between being disappointed and being aggravated, or something that's worth getting worked up about, and stuff which are not worth getting up about. Because obviously the Cubs season didn't really sort of petered out at the end. With that being said, I think overall it was a very good year, a great year. I'll get to that in a second. And then the other thing I want to say is I'm going to use the word luck sometimes in this video. I'm not using it to disparage the Brewers winning the division. Congrats, guys, for like the one person who's a Brewer fan who listens to this. I'm using luck as in we don't know, or it's a statistical thing. Regular season baseball is actually slightly too short by about 48 games to have 95% statistical confidence in. So every once in a while there's a race which it's just determined by time and a little bit of luck. It's happened with the Cubs. It happened. I think it happened this year with the Brewers. And I'm not trying to take anything away. It's just in terms of what Cub fans have to think about what went wrong. There's not much you can say. It's more of a question of what went right for the Brewers as opposed to what went wrong for the Cubs. And as a Cubs fan, I'm not trying to disparage Brewers. What I'm trying to do is take less stress off of other Cubs fans. Okay, so the reason why I was waiting for this to do this video is the Addison Russell situation. He was accused by his ex-wife of verbal and physical abuse. The ex-wife produced witness we have in the public record. It's also claimed that she produced texts and photos and other witnesses to the league and to journalism. I have not. The additional evidence was not released. In any case, Addison Russell was suspended for 40 game for domestic violence because he was credibly accused, blah, blah, blah. Plus, at this point, given Russell's statement, the Cubs statements, the league statements, retaining his innocence is a matter of mere faith. So I was trying to see how this was going to play out, because this is actually the thing that annoys me. Actually, this is the most disappointing thing about 2018 Cubs. It's just a fundamental disagreement with me in the front office. I don't think Addison Russell should have been tendered a contract, which that doesn't mean he's going to be a Cub in 2019. It means the Cubs are holding on to him to either trade or rehabilitate and everything like that. I think, given where we are in this country and given the accusations and everything like that, Addison Russell should have not been tendered a contract. And as a matter of fact, if it was up to me, as soon as I think it's 2 business days, but 2 business days after because you can't, if a player is suspended or in an investigation, their roster status is frozen, basically. And so there's nothing the teams can do by the collective bargaining agreement. But once that restriction is lifted, and I believe it's 2 days after a suspension, I would have just designated him for assignment, which was over a month ago. And I was hoping they weren't going to tender him a contract. I don't know if Russell is going to be on the 2019 Cubs. And then if he is, I'm going to have to think long and hard about it. Because even though with like the Chapman deal being a similar situation, Chapman, I already have to deal with Russell being in Game 6 of the World Series. The Chapman deal, I never liked it at the time. I go on record saying I don't. Basically, I'm glad he blew the save in Game 7, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in any case, Chapman was never really central to the Cubs in my mind, where Addison Russell is. And I realize it's probably ad hoc and hypocritical and everything like that. And I want Russell going. I also have to say he's not all that good of a player overall. He's very good defensively, but he's a way below average hitter. And I don't think it's worth putting up with this nonsense just for the sort of value he brings to us. Not okay. So for one thing, I don't think he could be the second coming of Willie Mays or Jared Jeter, and I would still want him going. That's not really relevant. But if I'm willing to think about it instrumentally, I don't like Russell is so marginal of a baseball player for the last couple of years at the plate that it's like I don't like. It's time to move on based off of this. But if you have to think about in terms of performance or being instrumental or means and reasoning, just being amoral about it, he's not good enough for the heartache that he's going to cause the Cubs in terms of press and everything like that. Anyway, so there's that. And I think the Russell situation being handled like this is the most disappointing thing about the 2018 Cubs, and it's far more disappointing, far more ill-advised, and more harder to deal with than the fact that they just sort of petered out at the end. Okay, so there's that thing. In somewhat similar vein, the other thing that somewhat annoyed me, why isn't this flipping? Excuse me, my computer's being a piece of junk. Anyway, the other thing that's a little... Okay, there it goes. Okay, the other thing that's a little bit aggravating is he didn't end up being impactful. He ended up helping a little bit, and this is more of an annoyance. It's not nearly as severe as the other as the Russell situation is. I really wish Daniel Murphy wasn't on the team the last couple of months, 6 weeks or whatever, or month. He ended up hitting weighted runs created, which is average is 100. He was at like 110, so he was good for the Cubs, but he wasn't as impactful as we were expecting. He's a free agent. He's old. He's not very good defensively. In 2015, he had a spiel about that he disagrees with the gay lifestyle, which, again, is sort of a petty annoyance to me because, like, it's not a lifestyle, and he's implying, like, volition, which doesn't happen. And so I don't think he's going to be re-signed, but just to sort of give, like, a moral distinction, I don't want Murphy on the team, but if Murphy's on the team, I'll, like, whatever, I can deal with it. But with Russell, it's more like I need him going for him to be still on the, for me to be as invested in the Cubs. So we'll see how that plays out. Okay, so now let's talk about the season. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the Milwaukee Brewers season. And the main number, I think, here... why we should look at what went right for the Brewers as opposed to what went wrong for the Cubs is this Pythagorean win-loss. They were 5 games above it. And then also, if I bring up the schedules and results, they weren't running at one point they were running like an 800 winning percentage in one-run games. They got that down to 635, which is not all that over elevated. At one point, they were running at 800 winning percentage, which is unsustainable. And some of it is Craig Counsell's is a very good manager, and they had a very good bullpen. Hader being sort of the main piece, and I really like Counsell as him being experimental, like doing that. Kind of a sneak attack in Game 5 of the NLCS, where he used a right-handed pitcher for 1 out in the first inning, and then immediately removed him to get favorable lineups, which I thought was a kind of very clever. So it's not that, and I actually sort of like most of the Brewers other than Hater, because him being sort of a homophobic jackass. So there's that. And so the other thing is, if you look at the if you're looking why the tiebreaker was forced and everything like that, you are like opportunities for the Brewers to have lost one more game. There's actually far more of them than the Cubs had a chance of winning one more game, because in the last week alone, the Tigers blew a go-ahead home run, which resulted in a one-run game. The Tigers had a 99% chance of catching it, and they fucked that up. There was another time in the last week when the Cardinals guy wanted to tie the game, but he fell down on third, around third, which is it also had like a 99% chance of tying the game or whatever. So like, there's no reason for Cubs to get upset because of the Brewers forcing a couple of luck by mostly through well management and well time. Their timing of their runs was better than the Cubs this year, being sad that the tiebreaker was forced. And by the time the tiebreaker was forced, the Cubs were such in a funk offensively that it was pretty obvious that they were not going to make it very far because they were so tired. So there's that. Now that's my bit about the Brewers. I think they did a good job for them. I still think next year the Cubs are going to be heavily favored. We'll see how it goes. I think a lot of it has more to do with well timing and luck than actual strength of roster. And the main reason for that is, again, the Brewers overperformed their underlying statistics by 5 games. Where conversely, if you go to the Cubs record, the Brewers also overperformed their projections by almost 12 games, which is not sustainable. If you look conversely, the Cubs, while they overperformed by 1 game, 95 versus 94, far closer, and that's probably just luck as opposed to luck and skill and non-reflective of the underlying talent. So I really want to spend a lot of time talking about the 2 areas of the bowl, the 2 parts of the Chicago Cubs. I thought 2018 Chicago Cubs I thought was really, really good. The first part was Steve Cishek in the bullpen as a whole, because if you want actual fact, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I think the main issue with the Chicago Cubs in 2018 was not on the offense. I think it was actually the starting rotation. Specifically, two of our big signings, Chatwood, aka Free Pass, aka Walkie, was absolutely awful, and then Yu Darvish just got injured. So in the Cubs starting rotation in 2018 was worth almost like Christian Yelich in terms of WAR was worth almost as much as the entire rotation for the Chicago Cubs in 2018. And so in practical reality, I think the issue with that is I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there was a shit ton of late inning heroics and come from behind wins. It was something like 40 or 45 games, and that's actually very, very tiring on terms of the offense. And so when you got into that marathon section of the season where they played like 30 games in a row, and the offense got more consistently bad, I think a lot of that was because they had to spend so much energy in the beginning and the middle of the season that they literally were just getting tired. So if actual fact, I think sort of the main thing that sort of hurt the Cubs, and again, I know this is going to sound counterintuitive because of the way in which the offense sort of disappeared in the last week or so. I think the issue was actually the starting rotation just not working out. I do not know what's going to happen with Chatwood. I would give him another start or 2 at the spring training to see if he can throw a fucking strike. Yu Darvish was mostly neutral because he mostly injury. Hopefully he comes back. Hopefully he does like 130 innings next year. everything like that. So there's that. And now, going back to the strengths of the team, this Joe Madden probably had his best year as a manager for the Cubs this year, because the starting rotation was was I think in some ways worse this year than last year. And Joe Madden, even though he pushed Steve Cishek a little bit too hard because he didn't really have as many options, and you could maybe bitch and complain about how he handled Stropey and Morrow. Madden's use of Cishek as a fireman to put out fires when in the middle of the games, and then mixing and matching bullpen management was really, really good this year. And the Cubs bullpen was absolutely outstanding through most of the year. And I really, really hope it's rebuilt as well this year as they did, meaning 2019, as they did in 2018. So just putting those two pieces together, if you were going to, outside of the players who determine most of the record, who would you want to blame in terms of the management, in terms of who had the worst year? I actually think you need to. I don't think Joe Madden should get any. Shouldn't get Joe Madden, Theo Epstein, and Jed Hoyer should get the lion's share of the blame here in terms of how the season played out as a whole, as opposed to Madden. Because if you look at Madden's job, given the pieces, given the structural issues of the team, he did a remarkable job. Because he had an inconsistent offense, and then he had an offense when it became consistently awful. He had a rotation that was absolutely shitty, because it was worth only 8.6 WAR, and then his bullpen. He was constantly juggling multiple relievers, tangential relievers, etc. He had 3 different closers at one point, meaning at one point in the season he was on his third guy designated as the closer, etc. Whereas Epstein and Hoyer pretty much. Their 2 big signings, Darvish and Chatwood, didn't really work. Morrow, it's like half on them, because the whole plan of preserving Morrow for only traditional saves and not to use him 3 days in a row, that was unrealistic in terms of trying to win baseball games. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think, if you want to go to the Morrow thing about him being injured, Joe Madden was dealt bad cards, and so Morrow got injured because he was used 3 days in a row. But the thing is, he was being warmed up for a traditional save and extra innings on the road, but then turned into 7 run lead, and he only pitched like 5 or 6 pitches. It's very, very hard if you get into extra innings to not end up using everyone. And they were like in inning 14. So it's really not maybe Madden could have not used him. But at the same time, having the expectation that situation would not have happened on Epstein and Hoyer's part was unrealistic. So there's that. So I would say 3 of their major signings, all pitchers, more or less were Darvish was a complete Chatwood was a complete bust. Darvish was mostly a bust, and it's because of injury. Morrow was mostly okay for the first half of the season, but then his contract, then he wasn't available in the second half. So it was really only Cishek that they signed, and the tangential relievers, like Farrell, etc. They did well on. And then also going back to sort of Theo Epstein and Hoyer's job, is this issue with the offense being inconsistent and being feast or famine has been apparent. It was apparent in 2015. It was apparent in 2016. It wasn't as stark in 2016 It was very stark and very apparent in 2017. And in 2018, it was also apparent. And instead of moving a position player or restructuring it that way, they signed. They traded out a hitting coach for Chili Davis. Hitting coaches often like. Hitting coaches don't change much, so there's that. Like if that's all they were planning on doing, it was sort of a bad mood. And then the other sort of thing is Chili Davis is not a launch angle guy, so he tends to poke the ball and put it into play, which is a different style of play. And I'm not convinced that it won't work because I think it actually somewhat worked for the Brewers, because the Brewers sort of had that offense, and then it also sort of worked for the Royals back in 2015. I'm not convinced that sacrificing power for average is necessarily a bad thing, despite the fact that launch angle seems to be the thing. I don't know for sure. It's just a sort of style of play. But in any case, in the Cubs 2018, that sort of coaching of trying to slap the ball around to get on base, other than Baez, the just didn't fit. It didn't gel right, and so I feel like Epstein also failed by not correcting sort of the main thing people talk about with the Chicago Cubs, which is the inconsistent offense. And so I think at this point there's enough evidence that there's just something about this group of guys. That the chemistry, meaning how they see the ball and at what times of year they see the ball, isn't a good fit. So I want some position player moved, which I'll talk about in the next time. So there's that. Now, of course, the other great part of the season was Javier Baez. Half his career WAR came from this year, which is amazing to me. It's that sensitive. I am expecting him to sort of suck next year because, it's Javier Baez. And anytime someone has a breakout season like this, they tend to drop down a little bit. And then also he's still not quite walking enough, though he did reach his goal, my goal for him this year, which is to walk unintentionally 10 times. That did actually happen, so I was so happy. In any case, he had a fantastic year. He absolutely took a step forward. So even if in 2019 he's half of what he was in 2018, that would be absolutely great, because he was worth. He was 6 times the players he has been in the past this year, basically, because he usually posted about 2 WAR. Okay, I guess 3 times the player, 2 WAR every other time. In any case, he came in second in the MVP vote, which is sort of bullshit, because DeGrom shouldn't have been MVP, not Yelich, because Yelich was worth 3 times as much. No, Yelich was worth. There's a greater difference in value between Yelich and DeGrom than Baez and Yelich. Yelich was 1.1. The difference between Baez and Yelich was 1.1 more. Between Yelich and DeGrom was 2.6, more or less. It gets a little bit tighter if you go to a different version of pitcher WAR that uses FIP, but in general, like the WAR most people use, there's that. So Baez and Yelich are within a standard deviation of each other. DeGrom is not. DeGrom is more than a standard deviation from Yelich, and I cannot for the life of me read the criteria and reach Yelich as the answer, because I think any argument that favors Yelich over bias favors DeGrom over Yelich, to the point where if you're going to vote for the most productive player, meaning of value, you have to vote for DeGrom. But if you mean value by what his value meant to his team, then the Yelich bias conversation becomes much, much closer than what the voters did. In any case, he also was an all-star. Thank you to those who voted for him. He also won the Silver Slugger, so this was a really good year for him. Again, I really, really, really hope that he continues. One thing that's really nice about him is he's had every single year, basically, he's had a growth in his offense, and he absolutely got better at laying off of junk stuff. He's still spastic. He's still sort of an error-prone spark plug. But hopefully, this was not a flash in the pan. Hopefully, he'll do really good next year, even though it is expected for him to lose about 40% of his production. Anyway, so that's going to be Cubs and culture for right now. I'll be back in a little bit to talk about the offense in more detail. And I guess I should just do this now. I'll make it one video. Okay, so when I say I want to move one guy, I don't necessarily. It's to me, it's not about who is the best, what person you want to move in terms of production. I think it's something about this chemistry of guys who've been together basically since 2015. One of them has to be moved. Or one or two of them have to be moved for something, just to get the chemistry different, just to get the bats different. My preference is actually because they would sign Machado. Okay, so I want them to move Russell no matter what. And then I would want either Schwarber or Happ gone, or either both or one of them gone to clear space, and then sign Machado to play shortstop and to be sort of behind Bryant. And then I would want someone like Pollock signed, or sort of a sweet deal. Bottom line, a sweet deal guy to fill in the layoff spot. So anyway, I feel like I'm just rambling. I'm already at 26 minutes. So this is going to be Cubs and culture. This was Cubs retrospective and who I want gone in the offseason. So right now, there really hasn't been any major movement for the Cubs. The winter meetings are coming up in like 8 days. So I'll do a video about that if and when something else happens. I don't think Machado's on the radar. I think they prefer Harper, but I personally would prefer Machado. Anyway, so I'll see you guys tomorrow. Cubs and culture out.